And so it's this really interesting community of room to boost literacy and room to grow and room to do what we can and all this amazing stuff happening. So I wanted to be able to, we say kind of like the bite-sized chunk, right? So kind of like find a bite-sized chunk and find a way where I could help contribute to that.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Literacy Launchpad podcast. I'm so excited to introduce today a special guest. Her name is Madeline Romer, and I'm here with her to talk to you about literacy and this particular podcast. But before I introduce you to her, I want to share a little bit about this podcast and kind of give you some insight as to what's to come. If you know anyone in your community, a family member, a friend, a relative, or someone who you think needs to know more about literacy as a whole, please share this podcast with them. We're here to share resources, information, and guidance as to where you can access how literacy is important to you in your everyday life and those around you. Please welcome Madeline Romer. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on here and get to talk to you.
Yeah. So, Madeline, you are a student currently who is getting ready to graduate from Syracuse University, and your major is in citizenship and civic engagement, which is a mouthful of a major.
It is.
And you can talk about that here a little bit, but you're here for a very special reason. And I want you to share that story with the audience and the listeners who are watching and listening so they can understand the why and the where. So before we dive into those questions, I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
Sure. So my name is Madeline Romer. I'm a senior at Syracuse University right now. I'm going to be graduating next weekend, so I'm just about done. But I've been studying civic engagement while I've been here, and I got really interested in education and literacy during that time. And so for my senior capstone, I wanted to create a podcast with the Literacy Coalition as a educational resource for the community. And so I think that's pretty much what we're here to talk about, is how this podcast started and kind of came about through my capstone project.
Yes, I so love that. So you just set the stage for us here a little bit. Essentially, you came up with this idea of wanting to create a podcast as your capstone project as part of your coursework in your program, correct?
That's right. Yep.
So what were the steps you took to kind of say, okay, I'm going to start a podcast, but then this idea and conceptualization of like it's surrounding literacy? Because I know that what we'll dive in here into a second is that you actually went ahead and, besides the vision for this idea of the podcast, but you actually recorded some episodes with some guests.
That's right.
So walk us through like your stages of like how you decided to say, I'm going to launch a podcast, and then like where did you go next to?
Sure. So it was a long process kind of getting to the capstone and narrowing down to literacy. In the civic engagement major, we kind of start out taking classes in a lot of different topics and kind of getting to narrow our own interests based on what we resonate with. And so I started to really get interested in education and literacy. And then from there, I did a research project where I focused on literacy specifically in the community of Syracuse, looking into the statistics around literacy levels and where the community is at, the intersection of that with poverty, with physical health outcomes, and also trying to understand the landscape of what that looks like in Syracuse specifically, the organizations that are offering resources to try to boost literacy, the amazing things that they're doing, but also what they need and what they want to see more of. And so during that process, I did 4 interviews with local nonprofits, and that included the Imagination Library chapter for Syracuse and the Literacy Coalition. And what I was hearing a lot from these experts that I was talking to was that they wanted to see more parent education. And so that's why once it was time for me to do my capstone and come up with, they call it our senior action plan. So an action plan of something you're actually going to create and go out into the community and make. And so we happen to have this really amazing audio lab on campus that you can use for free, and they'll train you on how to use the audio equipment. And my professor and I decided that that could be a really great way to share that information, especially since it was initially designed as specifically a parent resource for that early literacy and school readiness. And so I was picturing busy parents with tiny young children who are running around trying to cook dinner and clean, and they're coming home from work and they're commuting. And knowing that podcasts can be a great medium for really busy people, it seemed like it could be a good fit for busy young parents. And so that's kind of how it got started and how I landed on wanting to do a podcast and wanting to focus on literacy.
Yeah. And that's such an amazing, you basically outlined so many different things. I actually want to take it back a little bit to the research you did, because I think as for those who are listening, if you have gone to college and you're, doing research in college, you are required to almost have to put your thinking hat on, go to the library, use the internet for your best resource to utilize, and then identify where these things are. So how did you get to the point of saying, okay, if literacy is my topic here, to determine that it was going to be in this community of Syracuse, New York, or Onondaga County, to be more specific?
Well, the CCE, that's the Citizenship and Civic Engagement Program, is really specifically tied to its community and tries to be grounded in Onondaga County. The kind of whole purpose of how this major started is that there's this thing that happens where SU students are these university kids sitting on the hill and they don't really get out into their community like they should. And so that's kind of entirely what the program is about. As a sophomore, they start getting you out into the community with an internship. I started working at Westcott Community Center as a sophomore. I volunteered as a book buddy at Roberts Elementary. So I was getting back and forth. That was obviously before I had a car here, finding my way out into the community, learning the bus system. So I was doing that. I student taught at McKinley Brighton, also in the Syracuse City School District. I was in the first grade classroom there, which I really loved. It also helped me solidify that I wanted to focus on my younger age group. And so it's been really important to me the entire time to focus on Syracuse because that is the context that I'm in here. And it also is a community that I really think is so special because it has a lot of unique challenges, but it also has a lot of really wonderful people coming up with really innovative solutions to those challenges. And so we know that Syracuse has especially low literacy rates compared to the state and to the nation, but also that we have one of the strongest imagination library chapters in the country that has one of the highest saturation rates of kids that they're reaching. And so it's this really interesting community of room to boost literacy and room to grow and room to do what we can and all this amazing stuff happening. So I wanted to be able to, we say kind of like the bite-sized chunk, right? So kind of like find a bite-sized chunk and find a way where I could help contribute to that.
I love that. And it's such a beautiful story to think of this really innovative idea of capturing a demographic of folks who, when you tell who this audience was that you're speaking to, that ultimately needs this information, right? Because when you mentioned being a busy mom or dad or a busy grandparent or whoever you identify as of that school age child, where oftentimes as we look at our communities, there aren't always someone that's spending time with them because they're so busy in the day to day. I think back to like when I was a kid, I used to bring those books home from school, but if it wasn't for me sitting there and reading it while my parents were cooking dinner, or someone was there listening, then I really wasn't getting the reading that probably was necessary for my own development. I think that, that was pre-technology existing, right? We had landlines and we didn't have internet. But today's world, kids have tablets. And so I think parents might also feel as though they're engaging their kids in this type of media of a tool, a resource, a technology that sometimes without having an actual book, or actually how do you work with your kid or your child in helping them in understanding what literacy looks like from all the modalities that exist, right? So much there to like unpack and uncover.
Yeah.
I think it's just a beautiful story and lens and perspective that I so appreciate you kind of bringing awareness on and bringing to life. I want to dive in a little bit into the idea of like concept, right? So when you first envisioned this podcast, you mentioned already that you were hoping it would serve for people in the community of Syracuse, for those, busy parents, as you said, and then understanding and recognizing that the problem to solve was specifically around the fact that the literacy rates in Syracuse area, Onondaga County, were the lowest in the country that we've seen in so many cases, and in New York State as well. Tell me a little bit more about when you were doing your research, what did you find that kind of helped you see that, but also to determine this is the problem that I want to help solve and be part of the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of it was just starting to look at the numbers that were really surprising to me. I used a lot of information from the Early Childhood Alliance, who is also one of the organizations that I interviewed in those initial episodes that I was making for this podcast. And their data that they had there on their website is from a couple years ago, but it still gave me a reference point. And it said that only 22% of children specifically, I believe it was fourth graders in the Syracuse City School District were reading on level. And that was really kind of startling to me. And I wanted to see, once I saw that, I wanted to really specifically think about literacy, because literacy is such a building block to all kinds of education. And so kind of going from there, I became really interested in the earliest age range, because I was also seeing how pivotal that is. And part of that was because I was looking into Imagination Library and how they're trying to help solve the problem by focusing on ages 0 to 5, because we see that how a child enters kindergarten is an enormous indicator on their future educational success. And we see that access to print as a very young child, even before school age, is a huge indicator of educational success. And another one of those statistics that really stuck with me was that kids who enter kindergarten on grade level versus even just 1 year behind have half the high school dropout rate. So you can really trace it all the way through, and it's such a huge indicator. And so that's how I got interested in especially early literacy. And then once I was in a classroom, I was able to really see that and really see the difference between kids who had been working on literacy skills at home with their families or had been in preschool programs that were working on it versus kids that weren't. And being in that first grade classroom and seeing how big the difference already was really made me want to find ways that we could help parents understand how to get their kids ready for school so that they are on the right track. But also, even after that, if parents are learning about it once their kids are already in school, there's still a lot that they can do to support their children in boosting those literacy skills. And, teachers do what they can. And I think teachers are amazing. And I think teachers are superheroes, but kids also don't live at school. They live at home. And so being able to help parents understand ways that they can support this learning at home is really, really important. And as I was going through my research, that was becoming more and more clear to me. And then also, it really wasn't something I had considered as much, the parent education piece, because I was coming from the point of view of a student and hopefully future educator who wants to be in the schools. But hearing from the experts and hearing them say that they wanted to see more parent education was kind of what led me down that path, because I hadn't really considered that. But once I started talking to them about it, I thought it made a lot of sense.
And it makes so much sense. I mean, oftentimes, if parents aren't giving the right resources to know, like there's no rule book about parenting, right? You can read all the parenting books as you want, but ideally, like what fits into the mold of like someone else's parenting style and how they raising their kids is not going to be the same for you, because we all have different identities and backgrounds and uniqueness and how like our family culture and dynamic looks like. You could have a single parent who relies on their grandparent, the mom or the dad, or their grandmother, great grandmother to help support and raise that kid. And so that's the village, that's a community. And so that is starkly different than someone who may have both their parents, mom and mom, dad, or mom and dad, to what that could look like for the dynamics of what does it look like in their household. So, I mean, those are all so many, I call them golden nuggets of like why this is so important and so critical and mission critical, I think, to like not just our community here in Syracuse, New York and Onondaga County, but like at the masses. I mean, I just think of how the nature of what this podcast is going to do here from an impact perspective, and then spreading that across to other rural or, perhaps not urban communities where they need more work like this. Now, I want to go back to a couple of things you mentioned. You mentioned a couple of different organizations when you were describing who you interacted with and who you partnered with and how you got to getting these interviews scheduled or recorded. First, I'll kind of give some preface to this. So essentially, Madeline are talking about what she did before this podcast became to fruition. So the Literacy Launchpad is an extension of the work that Madeline created to get us to the Literacy Launchpad. So she's kind of like the founding person that kind of had this vision, this idea. In her work, she connected with a couple of organizations here in Syracuse, New York. So you mentioned the Early Childhood Alliance, the ECA, and then you mentioned DPLI or Imagination Library, which is also known as the Dolly Parton Imagination Library. Now, the ECA is a local nonprofit organization housed in Syracuse, New York. The Dolly Parton Imagination Library is a program that is housed under the Literacy Coalition, which is another nonprofit organization in Syracuse, New York, that basically runs the Dolly Parton Imagination Library for Onondaga County outside of, or I should say under, the umbrella of the Literacy Coalition. So in your work research conversations, the Imagination Library plays an important role. How and why?
So the Imagination Library is a really amazing resource for that age range that I'm talking about of 0 to 5 and of school readiness, because they will send out a free book to any child in the county once a month from age 0 to 5. And like I mentioned, access to print books is a really huge indicator of educational success. And I also mentioned the tie with socioeconomic status. And so being able to have that equalizer of any kid in the county that signs up can get a free book mailed to them every month is so huge. Because some of the data I was looking at in my research was this enormous difference between the amount of books in the home of a middle-class family versus a lower-class family. And it's such a huge difference. It was something like, I don't have the numbers with me right now, but it was something like the average middle-class family had an average of 17 books per child. And I think it was more than 50% of lower-class families didn't have any print books in the home. So it's just this huge difference. And then you have this amazing program like Imagination Library that will send you so many books for free. And they're amazing books. These aren't just any books. These are books that have been hand-selected by committees of educators at the national and international level of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. And so I got really interested in this organization a couple of years ago because I thought it was such a brilliant concept and I thought it was so important. And so that is why I initially went to the Syracuse chapter of the Imagination Library. And then I learned through them that they're under the umbrella of the Literacy Coalition. And the podcast was able to get linked with the Literacy Coalition as a whole. But I initially reached out to Kim Kemp with the Imagination Library program because I thought that they would be a great partner for this kind of podcast idea because, first of all, they're in connection with the parents of young kids. They are directly tied to the target audience, and they are already doing that work of getting the at-home literacy practice happening that was the same initial goal of this podcast. So that's the tie to Imagination Library, and that's why I started with them.
Yeah, and I love that. And it's so important to note that the Imagination Library chapter here in Onondaga County gives out about 16,000, 17,000 books a month to parents and families of children who are 0 to 5, so literally from birth to the age of 5, they'll get those 60 books. Is this 60 books? It's one book a month. I'm glad I did some math there. One book a month, and it's literally based off of that demographic of where they are in their age as they're progressing in their literacy. And it's to give the opportunity for, like, again, bringing that awareness to parents of, hey, here's a book for your kids, sit with them and talk to them about it and look at the pictures and look at the shapes and touch it. And it's got all these sensory opportunities. I mean, I know I've seen it firsthand and just in how impactful it's been. And I hear the conversations that you mentioned, Kim and Rich, who work for the Literacy Coalition, and how they've ultimately bring this to life in the community and continue to talk about it. Awareness is key here. Awareness is like
Absolutely.
the instrumental theme when it comes to all of these organizations that kind of overlap each other. They all have the same mission for each of their programs and how they support one another, but also in the mission to drive awareness for the community. And here the theme of awareness is for literacy and engaging with that audience that you mentioned early on about those parents who have that busy day-to-day that may not always have time. In your conversations with the individuals who you spoke, and before I jump into the question, I'll kind of say this. There's 4 episodes that Madeline recorded with these individuals that we'll refer to here in our conversation that we are going to provide as dripped episodes, as bonuses, so that y'all can listen to the conversation Madeline had with them. And all of those interviews are recorded in audio format. They're not in video, so you'll get the audio version of those. But what we'll do here is that we'll make sure that we'll let people know how to access those when they do get aired, so that they're in the audio format. But for the purpose of the Literacy Launchpad podcast, this is in a video and audio format as well. With those conversations that you had with the individuals from these different organizations, did you find that the theme was consistent, that it was about awareness and that it was about creating a sense of community for identifying who the people are that need to be aware of, like, how do you bring literacy to life in your home, and identifying who those individuals are that need the resources?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a very common theme that came up. And I was also finding that there was a good amount of overlap in what these organizations were doing and what these experts were talking about. And I thought it was really awesome the way they were kind of like co-promoting each other. Like they all want to make sure that the people they're talking to, if I'm talking to someone from Imagination Library, they also want to make sure that all their Imagination Library kids and parents know about the Early Childhood Alliance, because the Early Childhood Alliance is going to give them all these other resources. And the ECA is going to be promoting Imagination Library. And I talked to Book Buddies through United Way that does that in-school tutoring to try to boost literacy. And they're talking to parents to see if those kids that are in Book Buddies have younger siblings who could get enrolled in Imagination Library. And so it's this great thing where all these separate organizations are trying to reach the parents, and then they're trying to feed those parents into this broader community of literacy support and send them towards the other people that they can be sending them toward, and sending them to the libraries, and the libraries enrolling them in Imagination Library, and the libraries pointing them in all these other directions. And so I think finding the people who are eager to learn this information is a really important thing that all these organizations are working on. And something that I was really excited to do in those episodes that I was working on to try to expand the audience that we were reaching is that one of those 4 episodes of the audio only podcasts was recorded entirely in Spanish. And so that was an interview that I did with the founder of the Monos program with Partners in Learning that does bilingual English and Spanish education. And so the hope there was to expand the audience of people that can be reached with this information even further. And so that's definitely a goal that all of these organizations have. And it's a goal that I wanted to remain really central in the podcast as well.
I love that. And I can't wait to listen to that episode. I remember you mentioning that in our initial conversations that there was, and I think Kim also mentioned it too, that there was an episode where it was all in Spanish. I was like, wait, what? And I'm a native Spanish speaker, so I grew up being bilingual, and I could totally relate to why that's so important. And I oftentimes have a Freudian slip. I'll be speaking in Spanish, not realizing that I'm meant to talking English, because my brain oftentimes is switched into that codependency on, like, that's my first language. So I think it's going to be just an amazing opportunity, especially with the demographics of what the landscape of individuals is like from a diversity perspective here in Syracuse. Right. Oftentimes we look at those demographics from the socioeconomic status, and it is individuals from either the African American or the Hispanic communities that are in those lower, almost poverty level communities, where they're the ones that need those services and resources just as much as the ones in the rural areas where they may not be getting that same outreach of services, because they're so, I would say, the pockets are more inclusive in the urban area of the city as opposed to the outskirts of the Syracuse community and the outskirts of the Onondaga County. But to your point of the Spanish interview, that's going to be a fun one that I think and hope that when we do reach out to the director of Manos, that she's able to jump on, and maybe we can do some video recording of like, let's promote this more so that the people in your community and the people who are in the Latin community that may want to be able to listen to this, they can hear it and we can share with them in a much larger scale. So I'm excited for that. What would you say were the three biggest takeaways for you and your favorite part about this experience for yourself? Because I know it was a project that started out as a passion project, and also it led to impact, the impact that you're going to have. End game is like, podcast is forever, which is what's amazing about this, right? When we think about what a podcast can do, but to know that you started something that planted a seed, you grew it, it has a tree, the tree is living there. I'm just continuing you from where you left it off. What were the three biggest things for you from this experience that ultimately you're most excited for, you're most proud for, and that you can't wait to see what happens next?
Three takeaways is tough because I mean, it's been such a whirlwind of learning so much and having new information come in all the time and trying to translate that information into something that's shareable. But I think one of the really big takeaways was just the power of a tight-knit community, because that was something that I hadn't really experienced before. And seeing the way that all these organizations in Syracuse are so eager to band together, and seeing the power of something like a literacy coalition, which is a collective of many different organizations trying to work together to lift each other up and amplify each other's impact. And so I think it's been really beautiful and impactful for me to see the power of that and to see the strength in community. In terms of what I hope for impact and what I'm proud of, I just hope that this can continue to grow. And I'm so excited it's being continued in this way, that you're taking it over. You know, when I was making this, I thought, well, it's very possible that I'll make a couple episodes for this capstone, and then hopefully they'll go out to as many people as they can, and then that'll kind of be it. But that's not what has happened. We now have this whole new initiative happening. And so that is kind of better than I ever could have even hoped, is that not only that the episodes I made will hopefully reach the right people, but that so many more episodes will be created and reach people and continue to spread that. So what am I at? Is that two takeaways?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, and it could just be that. I mean, that in itself says so much. Do you feel like you have another one you want to share?
I think the one other thing that's coming to mind is more of just like impact on me as a person, is I think everything that I've learned through all this, first of all, it has made me so much more excited to be an active member of any community I end up in my life, and to really embrace that. I think that all these conversations I've been able to have with so many incredible people will make me a better educator. And I think I just as a person have been able to learn so much through this experience that's really going to stay with me.
Yeah. I mean, you should be really proud of yourself to know that with what you started, you had this vision and this dream for what you would want it to be. And it kind of just morphed into something. It's like a butterfly, you know, you have your caterpillar that then goes through a cocoon. And I think we're at that phase where like the butterfly is kind of coming out of its cocoon, and we're going to see this project kick off in a really high impactful way. And maybe in, 2 years from now, we can come back and record another episode and just reflect on this experience. You know, being an educator myself and seeing how students go through these phases of growth and change in life, I am so happy for you and your success. And you should be really proud of yourself to know that this is something that's going to have major impact on people, not just on the people in the Syracuse community, the Onondaga County community in New York State, but just globally. As a podcast host and creator and producer, I can tell you that podcasts have so much influence in today's world, from a modality of learning, from how people consume information. So I have to say thank you to you for like really thinking of this and envisioning this and being able to say, I want to do something for my community where I live now, even though it's not forever, and knowing that it's valuable. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for talking to me and for all of this and for continuing this project. It's really so amazing to see where it's going. And I'm really excited to see where it continues to go from here.
Yeah, me too. Well, for everyone who's listening and watching, just know that we'll have links below in the show notes, all of the different resources we talked about today, including all of those organizations that Madeline referenced. And then those other episodes that Madeline recorded that are audio only, be sure to check out the podcast website to see those dripped out here in this coming year. And we hope you continue to listen. Until the next episode, thanks so much for tuning in. Take care now.